The city glittered under the desert sun, its towers piercing the sky, its villas gleaming with marble and gold. Luxury cars lined the streets, and guards patrolled the gates, ensuring that wealth remained untouchable. From the outside, it seemed like a world of perfection, a world where dreams could flourish. But inside those walls, another reality existed, a reality invisible to most, a reality where one wrong move could erase a life. She was only 18. Her name was Maria de la Cruz. She had crossed oceans for a dream, leaving behind a small coastal town in the Philippines where life was hard and every day was a struggle. Her family had counted on her. Her younger siblings depended on her. Her mother's health was fragile, her father's work uncertain, and Maria had believed that her sacrifice could lift them all from poverty. Have you ever worked tirelessly for someone else, believing your effort would change everything, only to discover that those you depended on could destroy you with a single word or command? Have you ever felt powerless in a place where the rules were not written for you, and every act of defiance carried danger? Maria's story begins with hope, but it does not stay there for long. She entered a household where wealth masked control, where obedience was demanded, and where trust was a risk. She had no voice, no protection, and few allies. And yet, she carried a secret, one that, if revealed, could shatter lives and reputations, a secret that would lead to a disappearance so complete that no trace remained. Pause for a moment. Think about the courage it takes for someone so young to leave everything familiar behind for a chance at a better life. Think about the fear of finding yourself in a place where your fate is in the hands of people who see you as replaceable. If stories like Maria's matter to you, if you believe the vulnerable deserve a voice, subscribe now. Don't let her story fade into silence. This is not just a tale of a missing girl. It is a story about power, secrecy, and the dangers faced by those who have little and encounter those who have everything. Over the course of the story, you will witness Maria's childhood struggles, the dreams that drove her abroad, the harsh reality of her life in the Gulf, the shocking revelation she carried, and the chilling circumstances surrounding her disappearance. And as you follow her journey, consider this: what would justice look like if someone you loved were trapped in such a place? What would you do if a truth too dangerous to speak hung over your head, threatening everything you held dear? By the end of this story, I want you to feel her fear, her hope, and the weight of the secret she carried, the secret that changed everything. Stay with me, because every detail matters, every whisper counts, and the lessons hidden within her story are ones we cannot afford to ignore. Maria's story is a warning, a reflection, and a window into a world many never see. A world where silence can be deadly, and courage is the only shield. Maria de la Cruz was born in a small coastal town in Iloilo, a place where the sea was both life and hardship. Fishing boats dotted the horizon, and waves often carried the remnants of typhoons that swept through every rainy season. Her family lived in a modest home, one room with thin walls that offered little protection from the storms, both literal and figurative, that surrounded them. Her father, a fisherman, worked tirelessly, yet the ocean was unpredictable, and his catches were never enough to cover even the basics. Her mother spent long hours scrubbing laundry by hand for wealthier families in town, her skin roughened by years of toil, her hands constantly raw. Despite these hardships, Maria's childhood was not devoid of light. She was known in her barangay as cheerful and bright, a girl who could bring a smile to even the most weary neighbor. She had a natural curiosity, a love for books, and a dream she shared quietly with her mother: to become a nurse. She wanted more than survival. She wanted to heal, to give her family a chance at a better life, and to serve others with compassion. By the time she finished high school, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her young shoulders. Her younger siblings needed school fees, her father's boat had been damaged beyond repair, and her mother's health was beginning to fail. Every day, Maria watched her family struggle, each sacrifice adding pressure to her decision-making. At 17, she faced a choice no teenager should ever have to make: pursue her own dreams or sacrifice them to support her family. The decision was agonizing yet resolute. She applied through a Manila recruitment agency that promised work abroad as a domestic helper. The offer was enticing: a monthly salary 5 times greater than what her family could earn in the Philippines. It was a chance, albeit risky, to lift her family out of poverty. She dreamed of returning home one day, a little older, a little stronger, with the means to care for those she loved most. Her departure was bittersweet. On the morning she left, her mother hugged her tightly, tears streaking her sun-worn face. Her father remained stoic, but the worry in his eyes betrayed the anxiety that ran through the family. Mariah reassured them with the words she had rehearsed countless times. "Don't worry, Nene. I will endure. I will make this work for all of us." She boarded the plane with a mixture of hope and fear, carrying little more than her suitcase and the weight of responsibility that would follow her across oceans. The journey itself was a test of her courage. The flight was long, the cabin unfamiliar, and the knowledge that her family relied entirely on her pressed on her heart. She looked out the window as the Philippine Islands shrank beneath her, feeling both excitement and a gnawing anxiety she could not shake. The world ahead promised opportunity, but it also held dangers she could not yet foresee. Arriving in the Gulf, Mariah stepped into a life vastly different from anything she had known. The city was towering and impersonal, with streets that gleamed like mirrors in the sunlight. She was assigned to work for Sheikh Khalfan al-Hazmi, a man of immense wealth and influence. His villa was sprawling, with rooms she could hardly imagine, servants bustling at all hours, and an air of power that seemed to hum through every corner. For Mariah, it was a dream come true in one sense. Her family would be supported, but the reality was far from simple. The first months were grueling. Her days began before dawn, cleaning floors, preparing meals, attending to the needs of the family, and often stretching late into the night. Her phone calls home were limited and closely monitored, and though she wrote letters she hoped to one day deliver personally, the distance between her and her loved ones was constant and painful. Yet she endured, reminding herself of the purpose behind her sacrifice. Every chore, every hour of exhaustion, every lonely night was a step toward a better life for those she loved. Even in these difficult beginnings, Mariah's resilience shone. She made small connections with other staff members, sharing smiles in fleeting moments, and quietly holding onto the vision of returning home with success to show for her hard work. But beneath her determination, the first cracks of isolation began to appear. Being young, far from home, and surrounded by wealth and power she could barely comprehend made her vulnerable in ways she could not yet articulate. Her story at this stage is one of courage, responsibility, and the first stirrings of the pressure that would soon become unbearable. She had given everything to her family, and yet, the challenges awaiting her in the villa were beyond anything her childhood had prepared her for. Each day tested her endurance, each interaction reminded her of the fragility of her position, and each night brought both relief and fear in equal measure. As Mariah settled into her new reality, a sense of unease began to build, not from the work itself, but from the hidden dynamics of the household. Her innocence and hope, which had carried her across oceans, would soon confront secrets and dangers she could not yet see. The stage was set, and though she did not know it, the coming months would change her life forever. Mariah stepped off the plane into a city that felt both dazzling and overwhelming. Skyscrapers stretched endlessly, their glass facades reflecting the desert sun, while the streets below hummed with cars, motorbikes, and the distant calls of street vendors. Everything was foreign, the language, the heat, the rhythm of life, but she focused on the reason she had come so far, her family. Her first impressions of Sheikh Khalfan al-Hazmi's villa were almost surreal. The gates alone were taller than her childhood home, and the drive from the airport took longer than any journey she had ever known. Inside, marble floors gleamed under bright chandeliers, and the air was perfumed with scents she could not name. Servants moved efficiently, performing their duties with precision, their eyes alert, voices quiet. Mariah understood immediately that she was entering a household where rules were absolute, and disobedience came at a cost. Her days began at dawn. She prepared breakfast for the family, scrubbed floors until her muscles ached, tended to children who demanded attention at all hours, and often cleaned late into the night. Every small task was weighed and observed. Phone calls home were allowed only at certain times, and even then, she had to whisper her words and keep her eyes lowered. Letters she wrote were tucked carefully in pockets, hoping they would reach her family one day. Despite the exhaustion, she kept her promise. She would endure, and she would succeed for those she loved. At first, she tried to find comfort in the little moments. A smile from another maid, a quiet conversation during chores, or a fleeting glance of the city from a balcony. All small things that reminded her she was still human. She clung to these scraps of normalcy like a lifeline, but the intensity of her duties left little room for rest. The work was constant, unrelenting, and sometimes humiliating. A spilled drink, a late breakfast, a mislaid item could result in a harsh rebuke or cold silence. Every day, Mariah learned the limits of endurance in a world that judged her worth by obedience alone. Even as she adapted to her new life, subtle signs of strain began to show. Fatigue settled in her bones, and moments of sadness would come without warning. She often found herself staring at the small window in her quarters, imagining her family across the ocean, feeling both connection and helplessness. She longed for the laughter of her siblings, for her mother's gentle voice, for the safety of home. Yet each longing was tempered by the knowledge that she had chosen this path for them. Her dreams were bound tightly to their survival, and she had no choice but to continue. Among the other staff, Mariah made quiet friendships. Ruth, a Kenyan maid, was one of the few who noticed when Mariah's laughter became rare or when her eyes reflected more anxiety than homesickness. They exchanged short conversations in whispered tones, small confidences that reminded Mariah she was not completely alone. These bonds, fragile as they were, provided a thread of comfort in a life dominated by rules and surveillance. Despite the heavy routine, Mariah still held on to hope. Every evening, she would think of the day she could return to her family, bringing with her a sense of security and pride. She imagined the joy of helping her siblings study, the relief on her mother's face when she could ease her burdens, and the pride of her father knowing that his sacrifices had not been in vain. It was this hope that sustained her when the work seemed endless and the villa's walls felt like a cage. But within the walls of luxury and order, the villa held secrets Mariah could not yet perceive. Subtle glances, hushed conversations among the staff, and the occasional stern warning from the Sheikh were reminders that her world was tightly controlled. Power moved quietly, invisibly, and anyone who stepped out of line, even unknowingly, risked consequences she could not yet comprehend. The city outside seemed full of life and freedom, but inside the villa, Mariah's life was confined by invisible walls, where trust was scarce and vigilance essential. During these first months, Mariah's innocence was tempered by the realization that survival required more than hard work. It required caution, observation, and sometimes silence. Every task was measured, every step monitored, and every word considered. The villa, for all its beauty, was also a place of hidden rules and quiet threats. Mariah's journey had only just begun, and the challenges she faced would soon escalate beyond anything her childhood had prepared her for. Her story in this period is one of endurance and adaptation, a young woman learning to navigate an unfamiliar world while holding tightly to the reason she came, her family's future. But beneath her resilience, there were signs of vulnerability, a growing sense of unease that would soon give way to revelations that would change everything. By her 6th month in the villa, changes began to appear in Mariah that did not go unnoticed. The cheerful, hard-working girl who had once greeted every morning with a faint smile now moved through her chores quietly, her head lowered, her eyes avoiding others. Fellow maids began to notice how often she seemed lost in thought, how frequently she paused mid-task as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. At first, they assumed it was homesickness, the natural longing for family that came with distance. Yet, there was something different now, something that carried tension in its wake. Ruth, the senior Kenyan maid, was the first to perceive that Mariah's withdrawal was more than simple melancholy. She remembered small details. The way Mariah's hands trembled slightly while carrying trays, the sudden tears she would brush away when she thought no one was watching, the sharp intake of breath whenever the Sheikh passed by. These were subtle signals, small cracks in a carefully maintained composure, that hinted at fear beyond what Ruth had ever seen. Whispers began circulating among the staff, cautious and careful. Some speculated about illness, others worried about family back home. Mariah, however, did not confide in anyone freely. She spoke only in private moments, and even then, her words were measured. "I don't know how this happened. I don't know who to tell. If they find out, I'm finished," she confessed to Ruth one evening, her voice barely audible above the soft hum of the villa at night. The staff quickly realized that Mariah was hiding something, but no one dared push her too far. In a household ruled by wealth and power, even minor indiscretions could have severe consequences. Rumors were whispered with caution. Eyes darted around when certain names were mentioned, and a tense silence settled over the kitchen and servants' quarters whenever Mariah appeared particularly withdrawn. Fear, even among the staff, was contagious, and the atmosphere became charged with quiet unease. Despite her growing anxiety, Mariah continued her work diligently. She cleaned, cooked, and tended to the children with unwavering commitment. Her dedication masked the turmoil beneath her calm exterior, a veneer that few could penetrate. Every day she reminded herself of her purpose, the sacrifices she made for her family, the hope that her work abroad would eventually change their lives. But as her body and mind endured the long hours and subtle threats, it became clear that something more serious was unfolding, a tension that went beyond fatigue or homesickness. Mariah's demeanor began to affect her interactions with others. Small gestures, once natural, now required effort. Smiles became rare, laughter almost non-existent. She spoke less, answered questions tersely, and avoided eye contact with anyone who might notice her discomfort. Even minor mistakes in her tasks caused disproportionate anxiety, as if the consequences of failure extended far beyond simple reprimands. The villa, once a place of structure and routine, now seemed like a space where every move could be scrutinized, where every word could be interpreted, and where silence was sometimes the only safe response. The shift did not go unnoticed by the children either. They sensed the change in Mariah, the quiet tension that lingered in the air, and some of them began to treat her differently, either with curiosity or caution. The staff, too, adjusted their behavior, some offering support discreetly, others keeping distance, wary of becoming entangled in whatever secret weighed on her. It was during these months that the first hints of the revelation began to surface. Subtle body changes, small signs that Mariah tried to conceal under loose clothing, did not escape the attention of the more observant staff. Yet no one spoke openly, and Mariah herself remained tight-lipped, aware that any disclosure could carry unpredictable and potentially dangerous consequences. Fear was growing alongside secrecy, an invisible force pressing down on the household, influencing behavior and creating tension that few could name. Ruth, watching closely, began to suspect that the problem was not simple homesickness or fatigue. She noticed the moments when Mariah's eyes filled with worry and when she recoiled from even casual touches or remarks. The young maid's quiet suffering was increasingly apparent, yet she remained outwardly composed. Her courage and resilience were remarkable, but the weight of the secret she carried seemed poised to break through at any moment. The subtle shift in Mariah's behavior set the stage for the shocking events that would follow. Her withdrawal, anxiety, and visible distress were signs of a growing crisis, one that no one in the household could ignore for long. The villa, with all its luxury and control, was beginning to reveal its darker undercurrents, and Mariah's presence had become both a point of concern and a signal of tension that would soon culminate in a revelation with consequences far beyond the household walls. Mariah's secret could not remain hidden forever. By the 5th month, the physical evidence was undeniable, and the hushed whispers among the staff began to converge into a frightening clarity. Mariah was pregnant. At first, she tried to conceal it, wrapping herself in loose clothing, avoiding the kitchen when possible, and limiting interactions. But the careful balance she maintained began to unravel under the weight of attention. Staff members exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others wary of the consequences should the secret be discovered by the family or the Sheikh. It was in one quiet evening, away from the children and other staff, that Mariah finally confided in Ruth. Her voice was trembling, eyes filled with fear. She revealed the truth that none had dared speak aloud. The father of her child was Sheikh Khalfan al-Hazmi himself. She told Ruth how it began, an unexpected summons to the Sheikh's private study, A late-night call that seemed innocuous at first, but which quickly escalated into something she could not resist. She spoke of fear, of power, and of the feeling of being trapped. Her words were punctuated with the chilling understanding that refusal was not an option, that her silence was the only thing keeping her alive. When Mariah discovered she was pregnant, she hoped for understanding, for some way to return home without shame or danger. She approached the Sheikh, pleading quietly for help. But his response was chilling. "If you speak of this, no one will find you again." Those words echoed in her mind, and fear became her constant companion. The villa staff noticed the change immediately. Mariah's movements became more cautious, her work more mechanical. She spoke even less than before, and the tension among the maids grew. Ruth, aware of the danger her friend was in, tried to offer reassurance, but even small gestures carried risk. The revelation was no longer just a private secret. It had become a palpable presence in the household. Conversations were hushed, glances were quick, and the atmosphere shifted in ways that could not be ignored. Fear and loyalty collided, and the reality of the power imbalance in the villa became increasingly clear to everyone who observed Mariah's plight. The morning of Mariah's disappearance began like any other in the villa, warm and quiet, with servants already moving about their chores before the sun fully touched the marble floors. Mariah, as usual, began her day early, preparing tea for the family and ensuring everything was in order. But by evening, she was gone. Her room, usually modest but filled with personal belongings from the Philippines, was stripped bare. Even the few letters and mementos she had managed to keep were missing. The Sheikh's wife was informed that Mariah had run away, with her passport and a small bag of clothing. The explanation did not sit well with the staff. For one, the agency still held Mariah's passport, which meant she could not have taken it without notice. For another, anyone who knew Mariah understood she had spoken repeatedly about returning home safely and responsibly. Running away in secret, risking deportation or worse, was out of character for a girl who had been careful in every step of her journey abroad. Rumors spread quickly among the household staff. Some whispered that she had been quietly sent back to the Philippines under strict orders, with a promise of silence in exchange for her safety. Others feared something darker. A sense of unease lingered in the villa, unspoken but understood, as if the air itself had shifted in the absence of the young maid. Witness accounts later provided chilling details. Ruth, the Kenyan maid, who eventually left the Gulf, recalled overhearing a heated confrontation between Mariah and the Sheikh. Mariah's voice, though barely audible, carried desperation. "I cannot hide this anymore. My family must know," she had said. The following day, Ruth and other staff were confined to the servants' quarters for several hours while business matters were handled in the main house. When they returned, Mariah was nowhere to be seen. Another staff member, a driver who requested anonymity, later recounted being ordered to drive to a remote desert location that same evening. The trunk of the SUV he was driving contained sealed containers he was instructed never to open. Security was heavy, and instructions were strict. What transpired during that trip remains unknown, but it added to the aura of secrecy and fear surrounding Mariah's disappearance. Back home in the Philippines, Mariah's family grew frantic. Days turned into weeks without contact. Calls went unanswered. Letters received no replies. Her mother contacted the recruitment agency in Manila, only to be met with denial. She absconded from her employer. "We are not responsible for her actions." The family reached out to migrant worker support groups, filing missing person reports, but little progress was made. Officially, the narrative was that Mariah had fled her employer, leaving her fate uncertain. Her mother refused to believe this version. "She always told us she wanted to come home. She would never disappear without telling us," she said in interviews. The family clung to hope, lighting candles and praying daily, hoping for news of their daughter's safety. Every day without word increased the tension, the fear, and the uncertainty of what had truly happened in the villa so far from home. Meanwhile, staff in the villa became increasingly silent. Conversations were careful, interactions limited. The absence of Mariah created a vacuum of unease, where even routine tasks carried reminders of what had occurred. Every glance toward her empty room, every mention of her name, was accompanied by the unspoken acknowledgement that something irreversible had taken place. The disappearance sent ripples beyond the walls of the villa. Human rights groups and migrant worker advocates noted Mariah's case as part of a larger pattern affecting domestic workers in the Gulf. Young women from Southeast Asia and Africa were particularly vulnerable, often tied to employers through strict sponsorship systems with little legal recourse. Abuse, forced secrecy, and disappearances were tragically common, and Mariah's story became a symbol of the hidden dangers faced by those who crossed oceans for work, only to find themselves powerless in foreign lands. By the end of that day, Mariah de la Cruz had vanished completely. No body, no note, no explanation beyond the conflicting stories told by staff and authorities. The secrecy surrounding her disappearance, combined with the fear instilled by the powerful employer, ensured that answers remained elusive. Among those who had known her, her absence was a haunting reminder that the vulnerable could disappear in the blink of an eye, leaving only questions and despair in their wake. Back in Iloilo, Mariah's family refused to accept the official story. Weeks without communication were unbearable, each day heightening the fear that something irreversible had occurred. Her mother, desperate for news, contacted the Manila recruitment agency, only to hear that Mariah had supposedly absconded. The statement offered little comfort and no answers. Determined, the family reached out to migrant worker support groups. Local NGOs filed missing person reports with the authorities in the Gulf, but their efforts were met with bureaucratic barriers and vague reassurances. Investigations moved slowly, constrained by the power of wealth and influence, leaving Mariah's family frustrated and increasingly anxious. Her younger siblings asked questions her parents could not answer. How could a child, barely an adult herself, disappear so completely? How could no one seem to care or know her fate? Each unanswered question intensified the family's anguish. They held photographs, lit candles, and prayed every day, clinging to hope that their daughter might still be alive, that she might find a way back home safely. Activists and local journalists became involved, documenting her case and highlighting the challenges faced by domestic workers abroad. Some stories suggested she might have been repatriated under an assumed name, her silence ensured by threats or money. Others feared the worst, that her life had been deliberately ended to prevent a scandal. Despite these efforts, concrete evidence remained scarce, and the mystery deepened. Staff members who had witnessed events in the villa offered testimony anonymously. Ruth recalled overhearing Mariah's desperate pleas, her insistence that her family must know the truth. Another driver described the secretive trip to the desert with sealed containers, instructions given under threat, and the heavy security that surrounded the journey. Each account added pieces to the puzzle, but none provided clarity. The family's search became more than a personal quest. It became a fight for justice, for recognition that Mariah was more than a missing domestic worker. She was a human being whose life mattered. The emotional toll was immense. Every day without news brought grief, anger, and helplessness, yet they refused to let the story fade into silence. Through social media, interviews, and NGO networks, Mariah's story began to gain attention, raising awareness of the systemic vulnerabilities faced by domestic workers in foreign lands. Her case highlighted the imbalance of power, the dangers of secrecy, and the need for protective measures for those who leave home in search of better lives. Despite the growing visibility, answers remained elusive. Mariah's family continued to wait, hoping for news that never came, their lives suspended between fear and hope, their prayers a constant reminder of the child who had crossed oceans for a dream and vanished in a world beyond their reach. The villa's staff held fragments of truth, whispers that carried the weight of fear and secrecy. Ruth, the Kenyan maid who had returned home, shared what she could remember. She recounted overhearing the confrontation between Mariah and the Sheikh, a night thick with tension. Mariah's voice, though soft, was firm in its desperation. "I cannot hide this anymore. My family must know." The words hung in the air, and Ruth felt the gravity of the situation in a way she could never forget. The following day, Ruth and other maids were confined to the servants' quarters. They were told to remain there while business matters were handled in the main house. No explanation was given, and the instructions were delivered in a manner that left no room for argument. When they were allowed to leave, Mariah was gone. Her absence was sudden, absolute, and alarming. Another account came from a driver who still worked in the city. He recalled being ordered to drive to a remote desert location late one evening. The trunk of his SUV contained sealed containers, and he was strictly forbidden from opening them. Security was heavy, and the journey was conducted under tight surveillance. He refused to speculate on the contents, fearing consequences if he spoke too freely. Still, the story added a layer of unease, a hint that whatever had happened to Mariah was deliberate, orchestrated with precision, and shrouded in secrecy. Some staff believed she might have been quietly repatriated to the Philippines. They speculated that the Sheikh, wishing to avoid scandal, arranged for her return under an assumed identity, possibly offering money or guarantees of silence. Others feared the worst, convinced that her disappearance was permanent, a life deliberately erased to protect a reputation. The staff members who had witnessed Mariah's anxiety and fear confirmed that she had become withdrawn long before her disappearance. Her movements were cautious, her voice low, and her presence heavy with worry. Small gestures, adjusting her clothing to conceal her body, avoiding attention, speaking only when necessary, indicated that she carried a secret of immense gravity. Each staff member who interacted with her could feel the tension, the fear that every word, every glance, every act could trigger consequences beyond comprehension. Ruth's testimony was particularly revealing. She described how Mariah confided in her, explaining the situation with the Sheikh. She spoke of late-night summons, of interactions she could not refuse, and of the terror she felt when she realized she was pregnant. Ruth witnessed the struggle between Mariah's desire to survive and her need to protect her family's knowledge of the truth. She saw the young woman's strength and courage, but she also saw the heavy toll the secret exacted on her. Other maids, though afraid to speak openly, corroborated small details. Mariah's growing withdrawal, the way she avoided certain areas of the villa, and the whispered conversations that hinted at fear. One housekeeper recalled how Mariah would glance nervously whenever the Sheikh approached, her body tensing as though anticipating a confrontation. The staff collectively understood that Mariah was in danger, but fear prevented direct intervention. The accounts paint a picture of a young woman trapped by circumstance, silenced by power, and watched by those who could offer only limited support. The villa, while luxurious and imposing, was also a place where control was absolute, and any attempt to speak out could bring consequences no one dared face. For Mariah, the house was both workplace and prison, a gilded cage where every secret was a threat and every action carried risk. Witness testimonies highlight the broader implications of her disappearance. It reflects a systemic problem faced by domestic workers in the Gulf, particularly young women from Southeast Asia or Africa. Power imbalances, strict sponsorship systems, and social taboos create an environment where abuse and disappearances can occur without accountability. Mariah's story, while unique in its specifics, echoes the experiences of many others who live and work in similar conditions. These first-hand accounts provide insight into the tension, fear, and courage that defined Mariah's final days in the villa. They also underscore the challenges faced by those who attempt to uncover the truth. The stories of Ruth, the driver, and other staff members are fragmentary, cautious, and incomplete, yet they form the foundation of understanding for what may have occurred. Each whisper, each recollection, each subtle detail is a reminder that even in silence, truth can persist. Her story is one of resilience and vulnerability. It is a narrative carried through hushed voices, through acts of observation and quiet courage. Witness accounts reveal not only the mystery of her disappearance but the emotional and psychological strain endured by those caught in the orbit of power. They reveal the fragility of life in the household and the danger inherent in secrets too heavy for anyone to bear alone. Mariah's disappearance, while deeply personal, reflects a broader, systemic issue affecting domestic workers across the Gulf. Young women from Southeast Asia and Africa often find themselves in situations where legal protections are minimal, and their fates are tied almost entirely to the whims of powerful employers. This sponsorship system, known locally as kafala, creates an environment in which reporting abuse or seeking help carries immense risk. Workers can be deported, jailed, or blacklisted, leaving them with little recourse. Within this system, silence is a survival strategy. Speaking out can result in immediate consequences, and secrecy becomes both shield and prison. For Mariah, this meant carrying the truth about her pregnancy and her employer alone, with the knowledge that disclosure could put her life at risk. The culture of silence extends beyond the workers themselves. It affects those around them. Other maids, drivers, and household staff learn quickly that curiosity or intervention can invite danger. Fear permeates every interaction, shaping behavior and limiting the potential for assistance. Human rights organizations have documented countless cases similar to Mariah's. Young women vanish after reporting abuse or after becoming involved in situations that challenge cultural or legal norms. Often, no official record of the incident exists, and investigations are blocked or deliberately stalled. The combination of social stigma, legal restrictions, and fear of retaliation ensures that many cases remain unresolved. In Mariah's case, the secrecy surrounding her life in the villa was compounded by the power and influence of her employer. Sheikh Khalfan al-Hazmi was a figure of authority, wealth, and public respect. Any suggestion of scandal could have serious consequences not just for him, but for those who served him. Staff members were acutely aware of the stakes. Their actions, conversations, and even glances were measured carefully. Silence was expected and enforced, whether overtly or implicitly. The psychological toll of this culture is profound. Mariah endured fear, anxiety, and isolation while fulfilling the duties expected of her. She navigated a delicate balance, maintaining obedience to survive while secretly planning how she might protect her family from the truth. Even those sympathetic to her plight were constrained, aware that any misstep could draw scrutiny or punishment. The culture of silence extends to families back home as well. Migrant worker support networks, NGOs, and journalists often struggle to gather information. Authorities may claim ignorance, distance themselves from responsibility, or defer action to foreign counterparts, leaving families frustrated and powerless. Mariah's mother, for example, received repeated assurances from the agency that they could not intervene, despite her daughter's disappearance. The emotional impact on families is immense. Uncertainty, guilt, and fear dominate daily life while legal and social barriers prevent meaningful action. This systemic silence is reinforced by cultural norms that stigmatize certain behaviors. Premarital pregnancy, particularly in conservative societies, is criminalized or deeply frowned upon. Workers like Mariah, caught in situations beyond their control, face potential shame, legal punishment, or ostracism. The fear of exposure, combined with the power dynamics of the household, creates an environment where secrecy is essential. Yet, within the silence, small acts of resistance and courage emerge. Ruth's willingness to share what she knew, despite the risks, exemplifies the bravery that sometimes pierces through the enforced quiet. Testimonies from drivers and other staff provide fragments of truth, creating a mosaic of understanding from partial glimpses. Though incomplete, these accounts challenge the suffocating silence and ensure that Mariah's story persists beyond the walls of the villa. Mara's disappearance is more than a personal tragedy. It is a window into a system that permits power imbalances to dictate life and death. It highlights the vulnerability of young women who leave home for opportunity, only to encounter conditions where speaking out could destroy their lives. Her story is a stark reminder that silence is often not choice, but compulsion, a forced measure to survive in a world where influence outweighs justice. The culture of silence is insidious. It protects the powerful, isolates the vulnerable, and leaves families in anguish. It ensures that stories like Mariah's remain hidden, and yet, paradoxically, the very existence of those who attempt to speak out, like Ruth and other witnesses, keeps hope alive. Through whispered accounts, anonymous testimonies, and the persistence of family and advocacy groups, Mariah's story continues to echo, challenging the structures that sought to erase it. In this environment, every word, every gesture, every act carries weight. The culture of silence demands obedience, submission, and secrecy, shaping lives in profound ways. For Mariah, it was a prison of invisible bars, an unrelenting force that dictated her actions, constrained her choices, and ultimately set the stage for the unresolved mystery of her disappearance. After Mariah's disappearance, Speculation and rumors swirled around the villa and beyond, creating a murky landscape where fact and conjecture blended. Officially, the narrative was simple. She had run away, but those who had observed her closely, including staff who had worked alongside her, knew the story was far more complex. Her sudden absence, the stripped room, and the heavy secrecy surrounding her life all suggested that something deliberate had occurred. Some theorized that Mariah had been quietly repatriated to the Philippines, her silence secured by promises of protection or financial incentives. Under this version, the Sheikh and the household staff coordinated her return without public acknowledgement, ensuring the scandal never reached wider attention. While comforting to consider, this theory left many questions unanswered. Would a young woman, fearful yet determined to contact her family, accept such a solution without protest? Could such a carefully orchestrated plan remain invisible to other staff? The uncertainties fueled debate and unease. Others feared a darker truth. Some staff and witnesses believed Mariah's life had been deliberately ended to erase the scandal of her pregnancy and the involvement of a powerful employer. The secrecy surrounding her disappearance, combined with heavy security and the swift removal of her belongings, lent credibility to the theory that foul play could not be ruled out. In this scenario, Mariah's absence was a calculated measure to maintain reputation and control, leaving her family and those who cared for her in perpetual uncertainty. Back in the Philippines, Mariah's family clung to hope and despair in equal measure. Her mother maintained her daily rituals, lighting candles by a small altar, praying for her daughter's return, and keeping her photograph as a constant presence in the home. Every day without contact deepened the anguish but also reinforced their belief that Mariah had not left voluntarily. Her absence became a haunting presence in their lives, a painful reminder of both love and uncertainty. Human rights organizations and migrant advocacy groups cited Mariah's case as emblematic of a broader pattern affecting domestic workers in the Gulf. Young women, often far from home and vulnerable due to legal and cultural constraints, faced circumstances where abuse, coercion, and disappearance were possible without recourse. Cases like Mariah's highlighted the imbalance of power, the inadequacy of protections, and the dangers inherent in environments where silence and obedience were mandatory. Among staff members who witnessed the events firsthand, accounts provided a patchwork of evidence and conjecture. Ruth described overhearing Mariah plead for her family to be informed of the truth. Another driver spoke of being instructed to transport sealed containers to a remote desert location under heavy security. Though each account was fragmentary, they contributed to the growing understanding that Mariah's disappearance was not accidental, not the result of carelessness, but likely tied to calculated measures taken within the household. Journalists and online communities debated her fate endlessly. Some argued that the sheer influence of her employer made any investigation impossible, reinforcing the narrative that truth was secondary to power. Others focused on systemic issues, the lack of legal protections for migrant workers, the dangers of the kafala system, and the silence imposed on those who might speak out. Each perspective underscored a common thread. Mariah's story was not just about one girl, but about the vulnerability of many in similar circumstances. Even without physical evidence, the questions persisted. Was she alive or deceased? Had she been sent home quietly, under a new identity? Or had she been removed permanently to preserve a reputation and prevent scandal? The lack of closure magnified the tension for those who knew her and those who followed her story from afar. Every rumor, every theory, every partial account was a thread, but none led to definitive answers. The ambiguity surrounding Mariah's fate ensured her story remained alive. It sparked conversations about ethics, power, and human rights. Activists emphasized the need for reforms in the treatment of domestic workers, highlighting that vulnerability, isolation, and fear could lead to tragedies that were both preventable and avoidable. Her case became a symbol, a reminder that wealth and influence could overshadow justice, and that the powerless could vanish while systems designed to protect them failed. Ultimately, the aftermath of Mariah's disappearance is defined by uncertainty. Her family's longing, the staff's whispers, the theories circulating among journalists and advocates, all form a mosaic of speculation and concern. The lack of official answers underscores the fragility of human life in environments where obedience is enforced and power is unchecked. Mariah's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that those who cross oceans in search of opportunity can encounter dangers beyond imagination, and that sometimes even love and hope are not enough to ensure safety. Whether she was quietly returned, hidden under a new identity, or met a tragic fate, Mariah Dela Cruz's disappearance remains unresolved. Her name, photograph, and story persist, not only as a memory for those who loved her, but also as a warning about the vulnerabilities faced by young migrant workers in distant lands. The aftermath demonstrates that, while power may dominate, truth has a way of surfacing, even in fragments, whispers, and the hearts of those who refuse to forget. Mariah's story is more than a tale of disappearance. It is a window into the harsh realities faced by young women who leave their homes in pursuit of opportunity. Her life reflects the collision of innocence, ambition, and vulnerability with a world governed by power and secrecy. The dreams that carried her across oceans, education for her siblings, security for her family, a better life, were met with challenges that no child could have anticipated. The first lesson emerges from her courage. Mariah undertook the journey to the Gulf not for herself alone, but for her family. She demonstrated resilience, discipline, and a willingness to endure hardship for a purpose larger than her own immediate comfort. Her determination shows that true strength is often silent, measured not in grand gestures but in everyday acts of endurance and sacrifice. Even when faced with fear, uncertainty, and intimidation, she continued to fulfill her duties with a commitment that inspires reflection on what it means to persevere. The second lesson comes from the dangers of power imbalance. Mariah's situation was complicated by the sheer authority of her employer and the cultural, social, and legal systems that reinforced his control. Her story underscores how vulnerability can be exploited when oversight is limited and protections are absent. It is a reminder that the powerless often bear the heaviest burdens, and that courage, while admirable, can only go so far in the face of systemic inequalities. Third, the story illustrates the importance of awareness and vigilance. Those around Mariah, her fellow maids, drivers, and observers, recognized the signs of her distress. They noted changes in behavior, quiet pleas, and moments of fear. While constrained by circumstances, their attentiveness offers a lesson about the value of observation and support. Even small acts of care can provide comfort, guidance, or protection, and attentiveness can sometimes make the difference between safety and tragedy. The fourth lesson lies in the enduring nature of hope. Despite fear and uncertainty, Mariah maintained her resolve, thinking constantly of her family, her dreams, and the life she hoped to build for those she loved. Her family, in turn, clung to hope in the face of official silence and unclear outcomes. The human capacity to hope, to maintain belief in a better future even when circumstances appear dire, is a testament to resilience and the strength of emotional bonds. The fifth lesson addresses the consequences of silence imposed by systems and cultures. Mariah's story is intertwined with a structure that demanded obedience, secrecy, and submission. Silence, in this case, was not optional, it was survival. The lesson here is twofold. 1. The necessity of legal and social reforms to protect those at risk. 2. The recognition that systems which enforce silence can perpetuate injustice, leaving families and communities without answers. Awareness of these structures is critical to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Finally, Mariah's narrative reminds us of the value of empathy. Across oceans and cultures, her plight resonates because it touches fundamental aspects of human experience: fear, love, ambition, and vulnerability. Her disappearance challenges us to consider the lives of those who serve, sacrifice, and endure in silence. It calls for compassion, advocacy, and recognition that every story, even one shrouded in uncertainty, deserves attention, care, and remembrance. Her story is also a warning. The intersection of wealth, power, and vulnerability can have devastating consequences when left unchecked. The pursuit of opportunity, while noble, can expose individuals to circumstances they are ill-prepared to confront. Mariah's disappearance reminds us that vigilance, protective systems, and community awareness are essential to safeguard those at risk. For viewers, her story encourages reflection on privilege and responsibility. It asks us to consider the unseen struggles of those who serve others, often at great personal cost. It emphasizes the importance of listening, of noticing the subtle signs of distress, and of acting when possible to support the vulnerable. Mariah's family continues to keep her memory alive, lighting candles, praying, and waiting. Her photograph remains a symbol of both loss and hope. Though no conclusive answers have emerged, the impact of her story endures, reaching beyond her household to illuminate broader societal issues. She represents countless others whose lives remain invisible, whose struggles are hidden, and whose stories demand recognition. In closing, Mariah de la Cruz's journey is a reminder that courage and vulnerability often coexist, that hope persists even in the face of overwhelming odds, and that the pursuit of dreams can intersect with dangers beyond imagination. Her story teaches lessons of resilience, awareness, empathy, and the importance of protecting those who are vulnerable. It also serves as a call to action, both to recognize injustice and to advocate for systems that ensure safety, dignity, and respect for every individual, no matter where they come from or the circumstances they face. To all our viewers, thank you for watching. If Mariah's story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to never miss another story. Comment below where you're watching from, and let us know if you stayed until this point in the video. Your engagement helps us continue bringing stories that matter to light.